Okay, today's video is about collecting the evidence. It's something we talked about in class, but I just want to make sure that you know all of the steps that you need to take to get on track. So, this is where we're at. You're going to go into Google Classrooms, and we're going to show you a bunch of tools today that you need to keep yourself organized. First thing we'll do is we'll review how to use the thesis roadmap. I made revisions to some of them, and most of you were on the right track. And that's how you're going to make a plan for how to find your evidence. Next, think about the two documents that you need to look at if you're creating an exhibit. One is called Telling a Visual Story, and that's the overview, a reminder of what we talked about why this visual evidence is so important. If you put things like websites on your list of sources on your roadmap, that's not what we're looking for. Now we're looking for visuals, photos, maps, newspapers. What you do need to do is make a copy of organizing your visual storytelling. I'll show you how to do that, but that's going to be important to do. And the reason I'm asking you to make a copy of the document and keep track of it yourself is that this is your project. You are now in charge of collecting the evidence for it. You're not collecting it for me, you're collecting it to have a successful project. You will turn your writing into me again. One copy is due today, Wednesday. By the end of next week, you'll have the best version ready to go. Next week, we'll also conference and you'll show me your sources, but you're not turning them into me. The purpose in collecting them is to put them in your project. The other thing we'll talk about is that if you're making a documentary, there's an organizer for that. And if you're planning a website, there's a different organizer for that. So you would also make a copy of those items if that's the kind of project you want to make. So let's review what to do and look at a sample. So if you go into Google Classrooms, the folder is called Collecting the Evidence. And there's some things I need you to look at. The visual storytelling, like I said, is a document that's just kind of giving you the overview, a reminder of where you should be. It's telling you this is what you should do. Make sure that you are thinking of the best evidence. We did that with our thesis roadmap. And now collect that evidence, collect a variety, and keep track of the citations. Very important to keep track. So we're going to make a copy of Organizing My Visual Sources. And if you're not making an exhibit, you'll instead want to do the project plan for websites or the documentaries. And later we'll talk about the bibliography matrix. So that's here. I put the visual storytelling here as well. There's a link. Oops, sorry, wrong one. It's called Organizing My Visual Story. And if you remember what we talked about in class with this one is that the purpose here is that you'll drop a picture directly in the box, you'll have writing underneath, and then when it's time to make your project, we'll be able to cut these out and put them right on your board. So I want to show you a sample that I used last year, and that was for a project about the Equal Rights Amendment. So here's my thesis statement, and I broke down my claims. And if you remember what we did yesterday is we came up with questions that we have to answer based on that claim. We have to make sure our project answers, and then we define evidence to answer it. So let me give you some questions for this first one. Okay, so I want to talk about the questions that I have here. And I want to talk about that even though this is a brainstorm, it doesn't mean everything in our project is going to go in this order. So if in my thesis I talk about the passing of an Equal Rights Amendment in 1972 and the fact that it broke barriers for women's equality, I know that I'm going to have to talk about what the Equal Rights Amendment is, but I probably won't do that right away in my context. So just be warned of that. And then I need to talk about what barriers women face to being equal. That is what is going to go first in my actual project. So what are the kind of pieces of evidence I could find? I could find the text of the actual amendment. I could find photos of it passing. I could find newspaper coverage. As far as the barriers women faced, I wanted to point out that sometimes a good way to show people's attitudes is if you look for a political cartoon that either shows pro or anti your topic. So pro-segregation, anti-segregation, pro-women's rights, anti-women's rights. And then evidence of how the barrier broke. Well, I'm actually thinking if I look at the next question, is the barrier never actually did break because groups were opposed to the amendment passing, and so it was not ratified by enough states, and so it never actually passed. So that would eliminate this question, and I wouldn't have to answer that. I want to talk to you briefly about how to find these kinds of sources. Okay, back in our collecting evidence in Google Classroom, there's something called the bibliography matrix. This is not required, but I have it here so that you can see there are many, many, many places that we can look for documents. And so all of them are links that should work because I tested them out and I did add some new things, but I also want to give you a shortcut. So if I'm looking for documents related to women's rights, that's a little vague. So I'm going to put in Equal Rights Amendment, and here's the shortcut, is add the word primary source next to it. And no matter what your search engine is, the first things you should get should be pretty useful. Now, this is someone's Weebly site. I'm not going to use that. But this next one is a set of primary sources all related to the amendment that my project is about. Okay, it comes from a reliable source, the Digital Public Library of America. And I know you freaked out when I said 30 sources, but look, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 9 sources that I would use just on this one page. The next thing I wanted to show you is what a sample looks like. And I'm going to put this example in Google Classrooms for you tonight. But this is what the organizing visual storytelling will look like before when you've dropped everything into it, you're ready to show it to me, and we're ready to print it out and put it on your project. So for the Equal Rights Amendment, I have to prove there's a barrier. I'm going all the way back to Abigail Adams, a letter she wrote to her husband. So notice that with every visual I drop in, I can reformat it, but I have to say where it came from briefly and something about it. I'm not writing a lot because that counts towards my words. This is a quote from Abigail Adams. I probably would make that bigger. And then this next one is really long. I wouldn't use it all necessarily, but this is a really long quote from a document in 1848. And then this is an illustration that I believe I found in ImageQuest. In the build-up section, I'm going to talk about women fighting for the right to vote. So in this case, I found a poster for a meeting, and that was on ImageQuest. I found a Valentine for people who are supporting suffrage. I found a copy of the 19th Amendment and a photo. So just a variety of sources is what's helpful. Quotes are okay as primary sources, but just make sure you know who said it and that you include that information. So a wide variety of sources is what I'm looking for. Many came from Encyclopedia Britannica, which is ImageQuest, but some came from other places. Last thing I want to show you before I pause for a second is putting an actual article in does work because sometimes the headline is what is going to tell the story for you. And don't forget that if you're trying to connect to today, you need to find sources that are really up to date. This one is from actually today, literally today. This one's from December 31st of 2019. Okay, so just remember what I need you to do is make a copy of the organizing my visual storytelling, put your visuals in there, and keep track of everything that you're doing because this is your project and you're collecting it for you, not for me. All right, thanks.